The phone buzzed once. That was all it took. Cale Rourke didn't flinch, didn't look up. He reached for it the way powerful men reach for things, without thought, without effort, like the world existed simply to hand him what he needed. His thumb unlocked the screen in one motion. His eyes dropped, and the room changed. Not loudly, not with fire or raised voices. The room changed the way a window cracks before it shatters. A thin, almost invisible line running straight through everything. Saris Vale was standing across the table, 7 months pregnant, one hand resting on the marble counter, the other pressed lightly against his stomach. He wasn't staring at Cale. He was watching the city. 63 floors below, the skyline burned gold and cold at the same time, the kind of beauty that doesn't care if you're happy. The champagne on the table was untouched. 2 glasses. Cale had poured them before the call came in earlier, before his expression closed. Saris hadn't drunk from his glass. He never did anymore. He noticed the buzz. He noticed the stillness that followed. And then, because the black glass table between them was polished to a mirror finish, Saris saw it. Not on purpose. Not by searching. The screen's reflection caught the edge of the message. For words stood out before Cale's hand turned the phone face down. Extraction. Protocols. The Omega. Saris didn't move. Didn't speak. He kept his eyes on the skyline like he hadn't seen anything, because his body understood danger before his mind finished processing it. And danger in this room meant stillness. Stillness meant survival. Extraction protocols, Saris said quietly. From what? The air went solid. Cale looked up, and that was the moment, that single second before he answered, where Saris understood that whatever came next had already been decided. Not in the last 5 minutes. Not tonight. The decision had been made before the champagne was poured, before the lights dimmed, before Cale had reached for the phone at all. Cale spoke. Fast. Controlled. He used words like data leak and compromised and security risk. He used them the way attorneys use words, arranged to protect, not explain. There was no warmth in the delivery. No hesitation that looked like love. This matters. What Cale chose in that moment, composure over comfort, that was the real message. Saris's hand pressed harder against his stomach. The baby moved. A slow, turning shift like even the child felt the temperature drop. The door opened. 2 men entered. Broad shoulders. Dark suits. Men Saris had seen for years. Men who used to nod in acknowledgement when he passed, who held elevator doors without being asked. They didn't nod now. One of them said, "Sir," not to Saris, to Cale. And Cale said nothing. Phones appeared from jacket pockets. Not security phones. Personal ones. Someone in the far corner raised one toward Saris. Recording. The light on the screen caught Saris's eye for half a second and he looked away. He noticed who didn't meet his eyes. Every man in that room. Men who had sat at this same table, eaten from this kitchen, accepted invitations extended in Saris's name. Every one of them found somewhere else to look. The window. The floor. The middle distance where guilt likes to hide. Hi viewers. If someone you trusted chose silence while you were being humiliated in public, what would you have done? Drop your answer in the comments, I want to know. Cale didn't stop what was happening. That is the part that cut deepest. Not the accusation. Not the message. Not the men in suits who positioned themselves on either side of Saris with the practiced ease of people who had done this before. It was Cale's silence. Deliberate. Chosen. Saris straightened. Both hands moved to his stomach. He picked up nothing from the counter. He asked for nothing. He looked at Cale one time. Not with anger, not with tears. Just a long, steady look that said, "I see exactly what this is." Then Saris walked toward the door. The men fell into step behind him. An escort. Public. Unhurried. Like a verdict being carried out. And Cale stood at the table and watched. The penthouse door opened into the private hallway. The elevator at the end of it was already waiting. As the doors slid open and Saris stepped inside, he turned, just once, back toward the room. Cale wasn't following. The doors closed, And somewhere between the 63rd floor and the lobby, Saris realized this was no longer about a message. This was about what the message revealed. Not about a leak. Not about security. About who Cale chose to believe, and who he chose to let walk out of a room without a single word of defense. The elevator descended. Saris didn't cry. He counted floors instead, and somewhere around the 30th, his phone buzzed. Not a call. Not a message from Cale. A legal notification from a firm he had never contacted. The elevator hit the lobby and the doors opened into cold marble and low light. Saris walked out. The two men behind him kept pace, close but not touching, which was somehow worse. Like they were managing him. Like this was a procedure. The lobby attendant at the front desk looked up, then looked down just as fast. That told Saris everything about what information had already moved through this building before he even reached the ground floor. Outside, the city was loud. Horns. Late-night foot traffic. Someone laughing across the street. The world entirely unbothered. Saris stopped on the sidewalk. The men stopped too. One of them, the taller one, jaw like a concrete block, said, "A car is waiting." Saris didn't respond. He looked down at his phone. The legal notification was still there. A sealed digital header from a firm called Drayson Holloway and Associates. Not Cale's attorneys. Not the syndicate's legal team. Someone else entirely. He pocketed the phone. The car was black. Long idling at the curb like it had been ordered an hour ago. This is important. That car being there, already waiting, meant Cale had planned this before the message was even shown to Saris. Before the confrontation in the penthouse. Before the champagne that never got touched. Saris got in. Not because he was forced. Because fighting on a sidewalk at midnight with two trained men and a pregnant body was not a strategy. And Saris Vale had learned something very early in his life. That the people who scream loudest in the moment are usually the ones who lose the long game. The car pulled away from the building. Through the tinted window, Saris watched the tower disappear. 63 floors of power and curated silence. The penthouse lit up near the top like a signal. Like a lighthouse, except lighthouses warn ships away from danger, and Saris had spent 2 years sailing directly toward it. Inside the car, no one spoke. The taller man sat in the front. The second one sat across from Saris, close enough to observe but far enough to appear professional. Saris kept his hands folded over his stomach and stared straight ahead. His mind replayed Cale's voice. Fast. Controlled. There's been a data leak. Your access to financial systems has been flagged. Cale had said it like he was reading from a report. Not like he was talking to the person he had chosen. Not like he was talking to someone who was carrying his child. No tremor in the voice. No hesitation. No moment where love interrupted procedure. Saris had watched Cale's face closely in those 30 seconds. He had looked for something, the smallest signal that Cale didn't fully believe what he was saying. That somewhere behind the authority and the cold delivery, Cale was breaking. There was nothing. And that silence, the absence of conflict in Cale's expression, was more devastating than any accusation. The car stopped. Saris looked out. A building he didn't recognize. Residential. Clean. The kind of place where people lived quietly and no one asked questions. The door opened from the outside. Saris stepped out onto the sidewalk and looked up at the building. "Your belongings will be forwarded," the taller man said. That was it. No room number. No key handed over. Just a statement delivered like a logistical update before the two men returned to the car and the vehicle pulled away. Saris stood alone on the pavement. Just him. The city. The weight of a child pressing against his ribs. And a notification on his phone from a law firm he'd never heard of. He looked up at the building again. A light was on in one of the second-floor windows. A stranger's life playing out behind glass, warm and ordinary, and completely separate from everything happening on the sidewalk below. Saris walked inside. The front desk handed him an envelope without asking his name. Inside was a key card, a floor number written on a folded slip of paper. Nothing else. He rode the elevator up alone. The room was plain, small, functional in the way that felt intentional, stripped of anything personal so that nothing inside it could belong to him. A bed, a window, a table, the smell of cleaning solution and quiet. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and didn't move for a long time. He wasn't waiting for Cale to call. He already knew that call wasn't coming tonight. What he was doing was much simpler and much harder. He was deciding what kind of person he was going to be on the other side of this. He opened the legal notification again. Drayson Holloway and Associates. Omega Protective Services Division. The first line read, "Your rights under Statute 7, Omega Autonomy and Asset Protection, have been pre-registered on your behalf by a third party." Saris read that line 3 times. Pre-registered. By a third party. Someone had moved before tonight. Someone had known this was coming before Saris had any idea it was possible. He set the phone face down on the table. Outside, the city hummed. Somewhere above it all, a penthouse window still glowed. And somewhere in that building, in that room, Cale had made a choice that he likely believed was right. Logical. Efficient. What Cale didn't understand was that love doesn't survive being filed under protocol. Saris lay back on the bed, one hand on his stomach, and stared at the ceiling. The baby turned again. Small, steady, unbothered by everything the world above was doing. Days would pass before Saris understood the full shape of what had just begun. But tonight, alone in a plain room with a key card he didn't ask for and a legal notice he didn't send, Saris made a decision. He would not defend himself publicly. He would not beg. He would not reach out. What happened next would speak for itself. The elevator down the hall dinged softly. Saris turned his head toward the sound. It wasn't Cale. It was never going to be Cale. Morning came in without permission. Gray light through thin curtains. The hum of the city doing what it always did. Moving, grinding, continuing on without waiting for anyone to recover. Saris was already awake. He had been awake since 4. Not anxious, just conscious. There's a difference. Anxiety spirals. Consciousness simply stays with you. Steady and heavy like a stone you learn to carry because putting it down isn't an option. He dressed slowly. His body moved differently now. The pregnancy made everything deliberate. No rushing, no sharp turns, no pretending he could move through the world the way he used to. He checked his phone. 41 notifications. None from Cale. He locked the screen without reading them. He needed to leave the building. Not for any specific reason, just because staying in a room someone else chose for him felt like accepting a condition he hadn't agreed to. And Saris Vale did not accept conditions silently. He moved through them, around them, out of them. The lobby of the building felt different in daylight. Smaller, more ordinary. The front desk attendant gave him a brief look, the kind that lasted half a second too long, before returning to her screen. She had seen something, maybe online, maybe through the building's network. Maybe someone had already talked. That was fine. Saris pushed open the front door and walked out. The air was cold and direct. He pulled his coat closed. One hand stayed near his stomach, a habit now, not a gesture. He wasn't performing tenderness. He was anchoring himself. He walked, not fast, not with a destination, just the act of moving through a city that had no interest in his situation and therefore asked nothing of him. He passed a coffee shop with a line out the door, a dry cleaner rolling up a metal gate, 2 men in construction vests eating sandwiches on a low wall. Ordinary life, stacked up on either side of the street like it always had been. His phone buzzed. He looked. A news alert. His own name in the headline. He stopped walking. The article was short and blunt. An industry source, unnamed, had confirmed that an Omega associate of the Rourke Syndicate had been removed from a private gathering following concerns about a financial data breach. No charges filed. No formal statement from the syndicate. Just the shape of a story, assembled from pieces. The photo they used was from 14 months ago. A fundraiser. Sarah standing slightly behind Cale, hand resting at the small of Cale's back, the way you stand next to someone you trust completely. The comments were already moving. Saris didn't read them. He He pocketed the phone and kept walking. 2 blocks later, he stopped in front of a small park. Just a square of benches and bare winter trees with a low iron fence running along the edge. He sat down on the nearest bench. The baby moved. Not sharp, not alarming. Just a slow pressure shifting from one side to the other. Present. Unmistakable. Saras pressed his hand flat against his stomach and sat still. This is what no one talks about. When everything above is collapsing. The accusations, the exposure, the careful public unraveling. Life just keeps moving forward inside you. The child doesn't pause for the scandal. The body doesn't wait for the conflict to resolve before continuing its work. And something about that was grounding in a way Saras couldn't fully explain. He was not alone. He hadn't been alone since before any of this started. He sat on that bench for 20 minutes. No one reached out. Not Cale's brothers. Not the women who had smiled at him at syndicate functions for 2 years. Not the security staff who had once stood outside their shared apartment like a second wall. Not a single person from the life he had spent 2 years building inside Cale's world. Not one. The quiet that followed wasn't surprising. It was clarifying. He stood up and walked back toward the building. In the elevator, his phone buzzed again. Not an alert this time. Not Cale. A message from a number he didn't have saved. No name. Just a short line. Your appointment has been confirmed. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Drayson Holloway and Associates. Your advocate will be Tamara Voss. Saras read it twice. Tamara Voss. He didn't know that name. But the message came from the same thread as the legal notification from last night, the one about pre-registered Omega protections. The one filed by a third party he still hadn't identified. The elevator opened. Saras stepped out into the hallway. His room was at the end. Quiet, plain, temporary. He walked to it, sat at the small table by the window, pulled up the notification again and read every line of Statute 7 slowly. Omega autonomy and asset protection. He hadn't known this law existed. Not in detail. Not in the specific way that mattered. He had known, in a general sense, that Omega protections existed, the way most people know that safety nets exist without ever expecting to need one. He was reading it now like someone who needed every word. By the time the city darkened outside his window, Saras had read the full statute twice and taken notes on his phone. He ate alone, slept early, kept the curtains open so the city lights came in. And somewhere around midnight, just as he was close to sleep, he thought about Cale. Not with anger, not even with grief yet, just with the quiet, clinical recognition that the man he had chosen, the man who had chosen him back, had decided in the moment it counted most that evidence was safer than trust. That systems were cleaner than love. That the risk of being wrong about Saras was more manageable than the risk of being right. Saras closed his eyes. Tomorrow would begin something that Cale had no awareness of yet. Something quiet. Something sealed. Something that moved without announcement through the kind of legal channels that powerful men never bothered to learn, because they never expected to be on the wrong side of them. The baby shifted once more before Saras fell asleep. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse still glowing 63 floors above the noise, a legal notification arrived in an inbox Cale wasn't watching. Not from Saras. From a court. A week passed. Then another. Cale did not come. No call. No message. No attorney with an envelope. No brother showing up at the building door with an explanation that was supposed to sound like care. Nothing. And this, the nothing, was what finally broke the last clean edge of what Saras had been holding on to. Not the message in the penthouse. Not the escort. Not the news article with the old photo. Those were events. Events have shapes. You can put a frame around an event and look at it from the outside. The nothing had no shape. It just kept arriving. Day after day. Patient and indifferent, the way a verdict is patient once it's been handed down. Saras went to his appointment with Tamara Voss. The office of Drayson Holloway was not what he expected. No marble lobby. No power art on the walls. A modest floor of a mid-rise building, clean and functional. People moving through hallways with folders and tablets. speaking in low voices. The kind of quiet that belonged to people who did serious work without needing anyone to witness them do it. Tamara Voss met him in a conference room. She was a tall black woman with close-cropped natural hair and eyes that measured things quickly and without performance. She shook Saris's hand once, firmly, and gestured to a seat. "I've reviewed the pre-filing," she said. "No preamble. No unnecessary warmth. Your protections are already in motion. I want you to understand the scope." Saris sat, folded his hands on the table, listened. Tamara laid it out clean and direct. The Omega Autonomy Statute had been invoked on his behalf by someone with intimate knowledge of his financial standing inside the Rourke Syndicate. Whoever that third party was, they had identified 3 trust structures registered in Saris's name, not Cale's, and initiated a legal freeze on those assets pending an audit. "Who filed the pre-registration?" Saris asked. Tamara looked at him evenly. "That remains sealed at the filer's request. What matters is that the filing is valid. It was made before the removal event, and it gives you standing." Before the removal event. Someone had known. Before the penthouse. Before the message. Before Cale turned the phone face down on the polished table. Someone had known this was coming. Saris sat with that for a moment and said nothing. The rest of the meeting was details, documentation, a timeline of next steps. Tamara walked him through each one without rushing, without softening, without adding emotion to the information. Saris respected that. He was tired of people managing his feelings. He wanted facts. He got them. He left the office and stood outside on the sidewalk in the cold air and let the information settle. The days that followed moved slowly. He did not contact Cale. He checked his phone less. He started sleeping better, not because things improved, but because something inside him stopped waiting. And when you stop waiting for something that isn't coming, a specific kind of exhaustion lifts. He read, ate properly, walked each morning regardless of weather. He thought often about the nature of what had happened. Not the drama of it, the mechanics of it. How quickly Cale had moved. How rehearsed the explanation had sounded in the penthouse. How the escort was already standing by before Saris even responded. This matters. When someone has a system ready for your removal before you've done anything wrong, that's not suspicion. That's preparation. Someone had handed Cale a reason, wrapped it in evidence, and Cale had accepted it. Not because Cale was stupid, because the system was clean. Because the story made sense in the language that powerful men trust most. Data, timelines, financial trails. And because trusting the evidence was easier than trusting the person. Saris turned 32 years old during those weeks. Alone. No announcement. No gathering. He ordered food from a place he liked and ate it at the small table by the window with the city spreading out below him and one hand resting on his stomach. He didn't feel sorry for himself. That surprised him a little. He had expected grief to arrive louder, heavier. The kind that fills a room and makes it hard to breathe. Instead, it was quiet. A low, consistent ache that moved with him through each day without asking for attention. He cried once, briefly, in the shower on a Tuesday for no specific reason. And then it was done. He did not cry again. What replaced the grief wasn't hardness. It wasn't bitterness. It was something more like clarity. A clean, sharp understanding of what had been real and what had been constructed. And the space between those two things. 3 weeks after the penthouse, Saris received a second communication from Tamara. He was sitting on the edge of the bed when he read it. The message was short. The custodial protection filing for your child is confirmed. Court registered. Effective immediately. Call me when you're available. Saris set the phone down. He looked at his stomach. At the visible shape of a life that Cale had helped begin and then walked away from without looking back. He picked the phone back up and called Tamara. The call lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, Saris sat quietly for a long time in the room that was plain and small and still didn't feel like his, but had begun, slowly, to feel like shelter. Outside, it started raining. Somewhere across the city, a mid-level man named Darian Price, a fixer Saris had never met, had no knowledge of, and would only learn about later, sat in a parking garage with a phone in his hand and started to sweat. Because the numbers didn't align anymore, and someone somewhere had noticed. Sarah signed nothing under pressure. That was the first rule Tamara had laid out at the beginning, plain and direct. You don't move fast because they're watching, she had said. You move quiet because they're not. Saras had listened. He had taken that rule and carried it through every day since the penthouse. And now, in the 6th week since his removal from Cale's world, the quiet moves he had been making in the background were beginning to settle into form. The trust funds were the first thing. 3 structures, all registered before the pregnancy, during a period when Cale had quietly moved certain assets under Saras's name as a protective arrangement within the syndicate. It was common practice at that level, a form of financial insulation. What Cale hadn't fully appreciated was that the law didn't distinguish between a strategic transfer and a genuine one. The assets belonged to Saras. Legally. Completely. Tamara's team had filed the freezing order within 48 hours of the penthouse incident. By the time anyone in Cale's financial structure thought to look at those accounts, which took almost 2 weeks, the funds were already behind a court seal. Untouchable. The second move was custodial. Saras had not announced the pregnancy publicly. The syndicate world knew. The penthouse gathering had made that visible. But Saras had never made a formal filing for the child's legal protections. Not because he hadn't planned to, because the timing had been disrupted. Tamara had moved on that immediately. The child, still unborn, still unnamed, still a quiet presence shifting against Saras's ribs at unpredictable hours, was now legally protected under his guardianship. Not Cale's. Not the syndicate's. Saras's alone. Unless a court decided otherwise. And courts moved slowly. Cale had not petitioned. Had not reached out through attorneys. Had not made any legal move regarding the child. That silence had meaning too. The third move was the most careful one. Saras had submitted a public statement, a single paragraph, through Tamara's office. Not to the media, not to anyone connected to Cale. To the Omega Rights Registry, a legal body that documented formal complaints of displacement without due process. He didn't name Cale directly. He didn't have to. The filing described a removal event. Pregnancy. A sealed legal notification from an unidentified third party. An escort without consent. An absence of due process. The registry logged it. Filed it. Forwarded it to 2 oversight bodies. No press. No drama. No audience. Just a record. Pause on that. Because this is where most people misread power. They assume it announces itself. It doesn't. The moves that matter most are the ones that get made in quiet rooms by people who understand that documentation outlasts performance. Saras sat in Tamara's office on a gray Thursday morning and signed 3 documents he read in full before touching the pen. Tamara watched him read. She didn't rush him. When he finished and set the pen down, she said, "You're covered on every front we can currently access." "And the third-party filer?" Saras asked. "Still sealed." "Still sealed," Tamara confirmed. "But I want you to understand, whoever that was knew your financial structure better than most people with legal access. That's not coincidence." Saras nodded. He had been thinking about that for weeks, turning it, looking at it from different sides. The only people with that level of detail were Cale's own inner circle, his attorneys, his financial team, and his brothers DeMarco and Zev Rourke, who shared the syndicate structure but operated their own spheres within it. Saras had spent 2 years in quiet proximity to all of them. He had learned very quickly that Cale's brothers were not their brother. DeMarco was measured. Zev was unreadable. But neither of them had Cale's particular brand of controlled certainty. That quality that made Cale capable of making a devastating decision and delivering it without visible conflict. What Saras knew, what he had always known, was that the 3 of them disagreed more than the outside world believed. He stood, picked up his coat, thanked Tamara and walked out into the hallway. In the elevator down, he checked his messages. Still nothing from Cale. But a new message had arrived in the last hour. Not personal, not legal. A forwarded internal brief from a source Tamara's team had flagged. A mid-level financial document. An audit request, marked confidential, tied to a transaction timeline overlapping with the date of Saris's removal. Saris didn't fully understand every line of it. He understood enough. The extraction order, the thing Kale had used to justify the removal, had a timestamp problem. The order had been generated 40 minutes before the message arrived on Kale's phone. 40 minutes before Kale discovered it. Saris stood in the lobby of Tamara's building and read that line again. 40 minutes. He thought about the penthouse, the champagne, the city glittering below. Kale reaching for his phone without thinking. Or with thinking. Or, and this is the part that made Saris's chest go very still, without knowing he had already been handed a preloaded conclusion. Someone had built the evidence, planted the timeline, triggered the discovery on schedule. And Kale, brilliant, controlled, dangerous Kale, had walked directly into it. Saris pocketed his phone and stepped outside. He did not feel sorry for Kale. He didn't feel nothing, either. What he felt was the specific weight of understanding a thing fully, not as a victim, not as a participant, but as a witness. Someone standing far enough outside the wreckage to see the full shape of it. He walked back toward his building. The baby was quiet today, settled. And in a downtown office 3 miles away, a junior auditor named Precious Adeyemi was staring at a spreadsheet that didn't balance. She had been staring at it for 6 hours. She had run the numbers 4 times. She picked up her phone. She did not call her supervisor. She called the number listed for the confidential reporting line of the Rourke Syndicate's internal compliance office. It rang once, then twice. On the 3rd ring, someone picked up. And the last stable piece of the lie that had sent Saris Vale out of a penthouse and into the cold, that lie began, slowly and without announcement, to come apart. What would you have done? Stayed silent like Saris, or walked straight back to that penthouse and demanded answers? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you've ever been in a situation where someone chose a system over your word, tell me about it. Because the comment section on this one is about to be everything. The memo was 1 page, single-spaced, no letterhead, the kind of document that gets passed through unofficial channels because putting it through official ones would leave a trail nobody wanted to explain. Precious Adeyemi had found it attached to the wrong email thread, a clerical error so small, so ordinary, that it almost got deleted without being opened. Almost. She had been working in the syndicate's compliance division for 3 years. She was careful, methodical. The kind of person who noticed when a column was off by 2 cents and stayed until she understood why. This was not 2 cents. The timestamp on the extraction order said it was generated at 9:47 p.m. Kale's phone showed the message received at 10:29 p.m., 42 minutes apart. She ran it again. Different variable. Same result. The order had existed before the reason for it did. That's not how protocol works. Precious knew exactly how protocol worked. Because she had spent 3 years learning the architecture of systems designed to justify decisions that had already been made. And this one had a crack in it wide enough to walk through. She did not go to her supervisor. She did not send an email. She pulled the thread back further. 2 days of cross-referencing. Late nights. Takeout containers on her desk. Her coworkers left at 6. She stayed until 9, 10, 11. What she found, piece by piece, was a transaction trail that didn't lead to Saris Vale. It led somewhere else. A holding account. A name she recognized from a different context. A name that appeared twice in the syndicate's hospitality records from 6 months ago. A name that had also appeared briefly in the margin of an amended contract. Camille Osei. Precious sat back in her chair. She knew that name. Most people inside the syndicate's extended network knew that name. Not because Camille Osei was loud, but because Camille was the kind of person who appeared near powerful men without being their equal and never seemed bothered by the difference. She had been near Kale's circle for over a year. Precious stared at the name on her screen for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called the compliance reporting line again. This time someone answered on the first ring. I need to speak to an external auditor, Precious said. Not internal. External. And I need it on record that this call is protected. A pause on the other end. Your name. Precious Adeyemi. Division 4. And I need a confirmation number for this call before I say another word. The person on the other end gave it to her. She wrote it down. And then she started talking. 3 floors above the compliance office, in a corner room with a window that overlooked the city, Kale had spent 20 years building power inside. A mid-level fixer named Darian Price was having a very bad evening. He had received a call 40 minutes earlier from someone he never expected to hear from again. Someone who had been very clear about terms when the arrangement was made. Someone who had promised the timeline was clean. The timeline was not clean. You told me the order would hold, Darian said into the phone. The voice on the other end was measured, not panicked. That was the part that scared him most. It held long enough, the voice said. Long enough for what? The audit flags are already moving. If compliance pulls the full thread, then you move first. Darian stood at his window. The city spread out in every direction, indifferent and lit. He pressed one hand flat against the glass. If I move first, he said slowly, I'm the one who goes down. Silence. Then, that was always the arrangement, Darian. The line went dead. Darian stood very still. He thought about what he had done and what it had produced. He thought about the man who had been escorted out of a penthouse because the system had been loaded against him before the night even started. He thought about a pregnancy he had been told was not his concern. He thought about what a partial confession looked like versus a full one. And he thought about which one kept him out of a federal structure. He picked up a different phone, personal one, and he called an attorney he had never used for syndicate business. The call went to voicemail. He left a message. Short. No names. Just, I need to talk. Tonight. It's about the Rourke matter. I have documentation. He hung up, sat down on the edge of his chair. And somewhere across the city, without knowing any of this was in motion, without knowing that a compliance officer had pulled a thread, that a fixer was starting to break, that a name had surfaced in a margin nobody was supposed to read, Cale Rourke received a summons. Not a message. Not a call. A formal written notice delivered by hand to his penthouse door at 11:04 p.m. He read it once. Then he read it again. The council wanted him. Tomorrow. 8 a.m. No agenda listed. No subject line. Just the time and a seal that meant attendance was not optional. Cale set the notice on the table. The same table where the champagne had gone untouched. The same table where the phone had buzzed. The same table where everything had started. He stood there for a long time. And for the first time in 6 weeks, Cale Rourke looked uncertain. The council room had no windows. That was intentional. Cale had always known it. Had sat in that room on the other side of the table often enough to understand why it was built the way it was. No outside light. No reference point. Just the room, the people in it, and the weight of what was being said. This was the first time he sat at the center. 5 members. 2 of them Cale had known since he was 22. The other 3 had been appointed in the last 4 years. A generation of oversight that had watched Cale operate with the quiet awareness that power this concentrated always needed someone watching it. The chair on his left was empty. The chair on his right was DeMarco Rourke. His brother had not spoken to him since arriving. Sat down, folded his hands, kept his eyes straight ahead. That told Cale more than any opening statement could. The lead council member, an older man named Augustine Farrows, silver-haired, slow-speaking, the kind of man who won arguments by saying less than everyone else, placed a single folder on the table. He slid it toward Cale. The extraction order, Augustine said. Time-stamped. Cale opened the folder. He looked at the numbers. The room was very quiet. Cale had spent his entire adult life reading documents under pressure. He had a particular skill for finding the relevant line fast, processing it, and responding without showing the processing. It was one of the things that made him effective. This was the first time a document made him go completely still. 42 minutes. This isn't possible, Cale said. And he meant it not as a defense but as a genuine statement of disbelief. Because he had seen the message arrive. He had felt the shock of it on his phone. He had read it and made decisions, and those decisions had felt, in the moment, like responses, not like walking into something pre-built. The order existed before the message was sent to your device, Augustine said, which means the discovery was staged. Cale set the folder down. He looked at the table. This matters, because the specific quality of what Cale felt in that moment wasn't just about being wrong. It was about the version of himself he had believed in during those 6 weeks. The version that had made a hard call, a cold call, the kind of controlled decision that powerful men are supposed to make when evidence is clear. That version had not made a hard call. That version had been operated. Camilo say, DeMarco said, flat, quiet, first words he'd spoken. Cale looked at his brother. DeMarco didn't look back, just kept his eyes on the middle of the table. She had access to Price. Price had access to the order generation system. And Price contacted an outside attorney last night at 11:15. He's talking, Cale said. He left a voicemail. The attorney is ours. A pause. He has documentation, DeMarco continued. Transaction records. A message chain between him and Camille going back 8 months. 8 months. Cale exhaled once through his nose. Slow. The kind of breath a person takes when the full shape of something lands. 8 months before the penthouse. 8 months before the message. Someone had been constructing the floor beneath his feet for 8 months, and he had walked across it every day without once feeling the difference. Augustine spoke again. The council's concern is not the manipulation. That can be addressed through standard channels. The council's concern is the removal action you authorized. Cale said nothing. An Omega, pregnant, escorted from a private gathering on the basis of evidence we now know was manufactured. Removed without due process. Without independent review. I followed protocol, Cale said. You followed a protocol that had been handed to you, Augustine replied. There is a difference. The room stayed quiet. DeMarco finally looked at his brother. And what Cale saw in his brother's face wasn't anger. It wasn't even disappointment exactly. It was something quieter and harder to receive. Recognition of something DeMarco had apparently understood before Cale did. He stopped waiting for you, DeMarco said. 2 weeks in. I had someone check. Cale felt that land somewhere specific. Not in his chest. Lower. Somewhere in the part of a person where the things they can't argue with live. Where is he? Cale asked. DeMarco picked up a pen and set it down. Safe. His attorney has been thorough. I want to. You can't just want to. DeMarco turned to look at him fully now. You understand that, right? You don't get to want to anymore. He has protections in place. Legal ones. You reach out on your own terms and it gets interpreted as pressure. That's where you are. Cale looked at the table again. The folder was still open in front of him. The timestamps still there. 42 minutes. 8 months. 6 weeks of silence that had felt like strategy and was actually loss. The council requires a public statement, Augustine said. Formal. Accepting responsibility for the removal action. Naming the manipulation. This week. Cale nodded once. Augustine closed his folder. The Camille matter will be handled separately. The meeting ended. Cale walked out of the council room into a hallway that felt different than it had an hour ago. The same building. The same lighting. But the quality of the silence had changed. He took the elevator down alone. In the lobby, he stopped. He pulled out his phone and opened his messages. Found Saris's name. The last message from Saris to him was from the night of the penthouse, before everything, when they were still just 2 people in a room above a glittering city. It was a 3-word message. Don't forget champagne. Cale stood in the lobby for a long time. He did not send a message. Not yet. He needed to say something publicly first. Something that couldn't be undone. Something that didn't ask for anything in return. He put the phone in his pocket and walked out into the morning. And somewhere across the city, in a quiet apartment with morning light coming through an open window. Saris Vale was reading the same compliance report that Tom Era had forwarded at 7 a.m., and understanding with absolute clarity that the truth had arrived. Not because he had chased it, because it couldn't hold its shape any longer. The press conference was not large. Cale had made it deliberately small. No syndicate backdrop. No security wall of suited men behind him. Plain room. A podium. Maybe 40 people, journalists, a few council representatives, 2 photographers. He had written the statement himself. No attorney review. No PR polish. He had sat at his kitchen table the night before with a legal pad and written it by hand, crossed things out, started over twice, and arrived at something that said exactly what needed to be said and nothing more. He stood at the podium and read it. No performance in the delivery. No tremor designed to signal remorse. Just words, spoken at a steady pace, in a room that got quieter as they landed. He started with the fact. An Omega partner, his Omega, he said that clearly, had been removed from a private gathering 6 weeks ago based on evidence he had accepted without independent verification. That evidence had since been confirmed as manufactured. The order had been time-stamped 42 minutes before it was supposedly triggered. A third party had constructed the data trail and delivered it through a fixer now cooperating with authorities. He named Camille Osei. The room shifted when he said the name. Small movements. A few people writing faster. One photographer repositioning. Cale kept reading. He said, the failure was not only the manipulation. The failure was the speed of his response. The absence of doubt. The choice to move on evidence rather than on trust. And the decision to let the removal proceed in public rather than handle it privately. He said, that decision caused harm that cannot be undone by this statement. He said, Saris Vale is not a person who required investigation. He is a person who required protection. And I failed that. He stepped back from the podium. Questions came fast. Several at once. He held up one hand. I'll take 2 questions, he said. After that, I'm done. The first question was about Camille Osei and the legal proceedings. He answered it briefly. Ongoing. Cooperating fixer. No further comment. The second question was the one Cale had known was coming. Have you reached out to Saris Vale? Cale paused. No, he said. A follow-up before he could step away. Why not? Cale looked directly at the camera. Because an apology that leads with what I need isn't an apology. I said what needed to be said publicly. What happens next is his decision. Not mine. He walked away from the podium. The room erupted behind him. Voices, questions, the sharp sound of cameras. He kept walking. His car was outside. DeMarco was already in it, which Cale hadn't expected. His brother was looking at his phone when Cale got in and said nothing for a long moment. It was good, DeMarco said finally. Cale didn't respond. I mean it. It was the right call. Keeping it clean. I don't need it to be good, Cale said. I need it to be enough. DeMarco looked at him sideways. Enough for what? Cale watched the building disappear through the rear window. Enough for him to know I'm not going to make this about me. They rode in silence for a while. Then DeMarco said, quietly, he watched it. Cale turned. I don't know how I know, DeMarco said. But I know. Cale didn't ask how his brother had access to that information. He had stopped asking DeMarco things like that years ago. He just sat with it. Saris had watched. He had sat somewhere, in that apartment DeMarco had confirmed existed, with the lease in his name only, and he had watched Cale stand at a podium and say out loud what the 6 weeks of silence had cost. And then what? That was the question that lived in the space after every clear, right action. And then what? The apology had been made. The truth had been named. The record had been corrected in the only way that meant anything, publicly, without defense, without caveat. And Saris was still in that apartment, still alone, still months along in a pregnancy that had continued without pause while the world above it decided what the truth was. Back at the penthouse, Cale sat at the kitchen table. The same legal pad from the night before was still there, Crossed out words, 2 false starts, the final draft torn off and used. He looked at it for a while. Then he picked up his phone. He opened the message thread with Saris. Scrolled to the top. Hundreds of messages. Years of ordinary things. Pick up milk on the way back. I'll be late. Look at the skyline tonight, it looks different. Fell asleep on the couch, don't let me stay there. He scrolled back to the bottom. The last message. Don't forget champagne. He started typing. Stopped. Started again. Stopped again. He sat there for a long time. When he finally sent the message, it was short. 4 sentences. No request. No defense. No explanation of what he had figured out or how far back the manipulation went. Just 4 sentences that ended with one question. His phone went face down on the table. He didn't wait for the screen to light up. He went to bed. And somewhere across the city, in a quiet apartment with a night lamp on and the window cracked slightly, Saris Vale's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He looked at it. Read the message. Read it again. Set it back down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling. The baby moved. Saris pressed his hand flat against his stomach and stayed very still. He did not reply. Not tonight. Labor started on a Thursday. Not dramatically. Not with the sharp, sudden shock that movies prefer. It started quietly. A low pressure that had been building for days finally making itself undeniable. Like weather you've been watching from the window finally arriving at the door. Saris packed the bag he had packed and repacked 3 times over the last 2 weeks. He called Tamara's assistant, who had offered to be a contact point for exactly this situation. He called a car. He did not call Kale. Not because he was punishing anyone, because this was his. The hospital was calm at that hour. Early morning, the shift just changed. The hallways carrying that particular quiet of a building full of people doing serious work. A nurse led him to a room with large windows. Morning light just beginning. City still gray and low outside. He had chosen this hospital himself. Had toured it. Had asked questions. Had made every decision in this process the same way he had made every decision since the penthouse. Deliberately, alone, on his own terms. The labor was long. Not complicated. Just long. Hours of it. The kind of time that strips everything away until there is nothing left but the moment you're in. Tamara's assistant. A young woman named Brielle who had no medical training but extraordinary calm. Sat in the corner of the room reading quietly, available without hovering. She had brought tea in a thermos, which she offered once and then set on the counter without asking again. Saris was grateful for that. The nurses were efficient and kind. A doctor came and went at intervals. No one asked about the father. Not once. Either the file noted something or the staff was simply that professional. Either way, the question never appeared. At some point in the middle of the afternoon, Saris stopped thinking about anything except what was happening. Which is perhaps what labor is designed to do. Strip the noise away. Force you fully into the present. There was no room for Kale in that present. Not with bitterness. Not by effort. Just genuinely no room. The child arrived at 4:17 p.m. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. A son. Quiet for 1 second after birth and then loudly, definitively not quiet. Like he had been waiting to speak for 9 months and finally had the room to do it. Saris laughed. Just once. A short, startled sound. Not performed. Just honest. The nurse placed the baby on his chest. And Saris Vale, who had not cried since that one Tuesday in a shower weeks ago, did not cry now either. He looked at his son with the specific stillness of someone who has been waiting for something real and finally has it in his hands. He named him Azza. Not from a list. Not from a conversation. From a name he had carried in the back of his mind for years, quiet and clean and his own. Azza Loren Vale. No hyphen. No second name attached. His Brielle texted something from the corner. Saris didn't ask what or to whom. He was busy. He held Azza against his chest and watched the light change in the window. The city outside shifting from afternoon gray to the beginning of dusk. The first few lights of the skyline appearing one by one like they always did. Steady. Indifferent to events below. The room stayed quiet. And in that quiet, with his son breathing against his chest and the city doing what cities do. Saras felt something settle inside him. Not happiness exactly. Not relief. Something more solid than either of those. Arrival. The sense of having moved through something and come out on the other side still whole. Still yourself. Still standing. He had not lost the thread of who he was. He had, in fact, held on to it through the worst of it. Through the escort, the empty weeks, the legal filings, the silence. And brought it here, to this room, to this moment. His phone was on the table beside the bed. He glanced at it once. Kale's message from 2 nights ago was still unanswered. He would get to it. Not tonight. Tonight was only Azza. Later, after the room quieted further and Brielle had slipped out and Azza was asleep in the bassinet beside the bed. Saras lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling. He thought briefly about what he would say when the time came. Not what Kale deserved. Not what was owed. What was true and what was useful, and what would allow them both to move forward in a way that served the child sleeping 3 feet away. That was the only lens that made sense now. His phone lit up. Not a call. A message from a number he recognized, DeMarco Rourke. Not Kale. DeMarco. It said, "Congratulations. He asked me not to reach out. I'm reaching out anyway. I hope you and the baby are okay." Saras read it twice. Then he set the phone face down and smiled. Small. Private. The kind of smile that doesn't need an audience. He closed his eyes. And on the other side of the city, in a penthouse that had been quieter than usual for 6 weeks and showed no signs of filling back up, Kale sat with his phone in his hand and did not know yet that his son had arrived. But he was about to. The meeting was Saras's idea, not Kale's, not the attorney's, not a mandate from the council or a condition of the custody arrangement. Saras called Tamara 3 days after leaving the hospital and said, "Set up a meeting. Private. No attorneys present." Tamara had paused. "You're sure?" "Yes." "He's been very careful about not pressuring contact." "I know," Saras said. "That's why I'm calling." The meeting was arranged for a Saturday morning. A neutral location, a conference room in Tamara's building, not hers specifically, just the building. Clean and quiet and belonging to no one. Kale arrived first. Saras knew this because Brielle texted him from the lobby. He took his time coming down. Not as a power move. He just needed a moment. Standing in the elevator with Azza in a carrier against his chest. His son's weight grounding him the way it had every day since the birth. He was not nervous. That surprised him a little. The elevator opened. Saras walked into the conference room. Kale was standing near the window. He had his back half turned, watching the street below. He turned when Saras entered. And whatever Kale had prepared to say, whatever he had rehearsed, whatever words he had arranged on the drive over, it visibly left him when he saw Azza. He went completely still. Saras stopped near the table. "Let Kale look. This matters. Because this was the moment. Not the press conference. Not the apology. This moment. A man seeing his son for the first time in a neutral room with nothing to perform and nothing to win." Kale's face moved in a way Saras had not seen before. Not control. Not composure. Just a person receiving something real. "Can I?" Kale started. Stopped. "Yes," Saras said. Kale crossed the room slowly. He looked at Azza the way people look at things they don't trust themselves to touch carefully, fully, like the looking alone has weight. "His name is Azza," Saras said. Kale repeated it quietly, almost to himself. "Azza." A long moment passed. Then Kale stepped back, looked at Saras directly. And without preamble, without warm-up, he said, "I don't have anything left to explain. I said what I said. Publicly. I know what it cost." Saras looked at him evenly. "What I want," Kale continued, "is whatever you're willing to offer, in terms of being his father. Whatever that looks like in your terms." Saras sat down at the table. Kale waited. "I forgive you," Saras said. Kale's jaw shifted. "Not because what happened was small," Saras continued. "It wasn't. And not because I'm past it. I'm not all the way past it yet. But I know who built the trap, and I know you walked into it because you were trained to trust systems over people. And that's a problem, but it's not the same thing as being a bad person. Kale sat down across from him. Slowly. The reconciliation, Sarah said. That's not something I can give you. Kale didn't flinch. I know. We are not going back to what we were. I need you to understand that isn't a punishment. That's just what's true. I understand, Kale said. And he meant it. Sarah could tell by the way he said it. No resistance. No negotiation. Just receiving it. What we can build, Sarah said, is something that works for him. He adjusted the carrier slightly. Azza stirred, then settled. Consistent, honest, protected from whatever the syndicate's world carries. I'll need guarantees in writing. Tamara's team has a framework. I'll sign it, Kale said. Today. Saris nodded. They sat in the quiet of the room for a moment. The city moved outside. Ordinary sounds. A bus. Wind against the glass. The unremarkable rhythm of the world continuing. He looks like you, Kale said, quietly, looking at Azza. He has your hands, Saris replied. Kale looked down at his own hands. Something passed across his face. Brief, unguarded. Then it was done. Not dramatically. Not with a scene. That was the thing about real endings, they didn't announce themselves. They just arrived, plain and honest, and then you were on the other side of them. Tamara entered 20 minutes later with the framework. They reviewed it. Kale asked 3 questions, good ones, the kind that showed he had actually thought about what Azza would need, not about what would look best. He signed it. Saris signed it. Brielle witnessed it. When it was done, Saris stood, picked up the diaper bag, adjusted the carrier. Kale stood as well. He looked at Saris. He didn't ask if there was any chance. He didn't say something that would need to be undone later. He just said, thank you for this. Saris met his eyes. Take care of yourself, Kale. He's going to need his father present. Not perfect present. Kale nodded. Saris walked to the door. He did not look back. Not because it was easy. Because he understood something now that the last several months had carved into him slowly and without mercy. That love doesn't disappear when it becomes impossible. It just changes shape. It becomes something quieter, cleaner, a thing you carry without wearing it. He stepped into the elevator, pressed the lobby button. Azza made a small sound against his chest, shifting, settling. Saris pressed his hand against his son's back and stood very still as the elevator descended. He thought about the penthouse, the skyline, the champagne no one drank, a phone buzzing on a polished table and a reflection that changed everything. He thought about the weeks of silence, the filings, the long nights, the moment Azza arrived and the world narrowed to that room and that weight on his chest and nothing else. He thought about what Kale had said publicly. I failed that. And then he let it all go. Not with effort, with decision. The lobby doors opened. Saris walked out into the morning. The air was cold and direct. The city spread out in every direction. Loud and unbothered and completely indifferent to what had just been resolved on a Saturday morning in a conference room on the 4th floor. He didn't need the city to know. He didn't need anyone to know. Power doesn't roar. That's something people learn only after they've survived something. It doesn't announce. It doesn't perform. It just walks out of a building in the morning with a child against its chest and a signed agreement in its bag and the quiet certainty that what comes next belongs to it. He didn't lose himself in that penthouse. He had only lost the version of himself that would have stayed. And the version that walked out of that elevator. That version was just getting started. If the story stayed with you, if you've ever had to choose between staying and protecting yourself, or if you've watched someone build themselves back up after being let down by the one person they trusted most, drop a comment. Share what you would have done. Your thoughts matter here, and they might be exactly what someone else reading that comment needs to hear today. If you're new here, this channel is a space for stories that move. Stories that ask real questions. Stories about power, love, and what people are made of when everything gets tested. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. New ones come through regularly, and the next one is already in the works. You've been here from chapter 1. That means something. Thank you for staying all the way to the end.